Now, opening up Pictures to Exe, I've got two images I've dragged down here. They're both 1920 1080. But I've also got one here that's not been sized at all. You can see it's quite a colossal size at the moment. I'm going to drag that down too. Now, you may remember the method we used to apply the frame that was created in Photoshop for the section we did on those fine lines around the outside of an image. It's exactly the same. Select the first image you want to apply it to and go to the Objects and Animation screen. Make sure you lose the bounding box by clicking around the edge and you'll see it removed. Then we can add an image, but the image we actually add is the frame we created. So we need to navigate to where we're working. There's the frame and we can choose to open it. Straight away it's dropped into place, fits quite nicely, and we can see the drop shadow. Of course, we're going to see the drop shadow far greater on lighter toned images than darker toned images, but perhaps I'll show you a way to improve the performance of your shadow quickly when you've got images which have a more darker appearance. But to move on to the next image, I just need to copy the frame from over on the right hand side. So just select the frame, Control C will copy that to your clipboard. I can skip to the next image, just lose the bounding box again by clicking into the grey. Control V will paste it. Skip to the next one. Click the grey. Because this hasn't been resized, you'll notice that we've got some blanks around the edge. But there we can quickly apply the frame to 3 or 33. You get quite quick at this, just skipping from one image to the other and hitting Control V. Let me come out of the Objects and Animation screen and we can just see the frame applied to the thumbnails I have. Now, the one thing we do need to consider here is that the frame is covering part of the image. You could argue with the golden eagle it's not that important, but with this image it certainly is, and we can see that we're losing some of the image at the top and some of the image at the bottom. In that case, I would go to my Objects and Animation screen, select the lemur finish image because you can see now the outer aspect of that, and if I go to my animation and my zoom and I put the cursor in the zoom box, I can use my down arrow to drop down the size. I can't go too far, of course, couldn't go that far, but I can certainly go to about there. Maybe I could squeeze it there, but there is sufficient. We just about clear the edge. But here's a little dodge just in case you need it. We can in fact distort the image just a little bit. We have to be careful doing this, but in many cases I've found it's perfectly okay. A couple of ways to do this. The simplest is to hold the Shift key, move the cursor over that center toggle, and I can click and drag upwards. Now what I'm effectively doing, if you look over to the right, is I'm adjusting the Y values of the zoom and the pan together. But you can see how it compresses the image just a little bit. I can do it both sides, and as long as we don't go too far, you can see it displays the image pretty well. What I've effectively done by using that Shift key is to avoid coming over here to the zoom and clicking the link, because I could have done that. I could have broken the link, which enables me to change the X and the Y values independently. But the Shift key is pretty convenient, and the image, I think, looks pretty good, and we're ready to move on. If I move on to the next image here, I've clicked that and it's taking just a couple of seconds to change. The reason it's doing that is because remember when I showed you the bald eagle picture, it was colossal in size. Now I wouldn't suggest you work with an image of this particular size. This is over 6,000 pixels. So what would we need if we wanted to just animate this image inside of the frame? Well, if we're going to have just very delicate animation, probably not very much at all. But if you took this back into your image editor and you resized it to 2560x1440, that's going to meet all of your needs. But just for demonstration purposes here, if I wanted to just zoom this a little bit, what I could do is to put my cursor here, and I could just drop down that size a little bit, so I've got the width about as much as I can get it. But I might use my little dodge here. I'm going to use my shift key again and just drop this down a little bit. I don't want to squash the poor bird too much, but I don't think that's doing a great deal of damage. And I also quite like the idea of just moving the bird up a little bit, just so that it's clears the bottom with the white feathers down here. Which means, what are we going to do as we zoom? Well, we're all going to choose something different, but let me just put a cursor up this end and hit the insert key. Let's just assume that we want to actually come in pretty tight. Let me drop that down here. We want to come in pretty tight on the eye and the beak. I'm going to turn the pan on here, and I'm going to use my up arrow to just drop it down. So let's say we wanted something like that. I think just before I press play, which is what I was about to do, perhaps what I should do is give this a little more time. I think 7 seconds to carry out the movement that I applied to it may be a little bit over the top. It would all move rather fast. In fact, we'll push that to 15 seconds, and I'll select both of these and just increase those to 9, just to give us a little bit more of a leisurely look at what we've created with the frame. Looks pretty good, and the lemurs are next. And finally, because we've got our frame on a different layer, we're able to animate the image within. And now I think that animation doesn't look too bad. This may be one of those times though where we actually want the animation to come to a stop before the image leaves the screen. Let's assume we had another image after this one. Then this one in the objects and animation screen, what I would probably do is to bring this back here somewhere. But I would also, because I've done that, I've given less time now for the animation to take place. So I'd need a greater slide duration. Now, coming back to the slide list, all I've done with my bald eagle here is to give it an extra couple of seconds slide duration. But the keyframe that stops both the zoom and the pan is at 14 seconds, because we know 2 seconds of the 18 we can see here is this 2 seconds here. So the animation is going to stop 2 seconds before this image starts to fade off the screen. So let's just take a look at that. So the animation is working as the image appears, which I think works quite well, but it just comes to a gentle stop. And it's important, if we're going to do something like this, the eye and that part of the bird needs to be sharp, of course. So there we have a nice frame, created quickly and easily in Photoshop, but just as easy to do in Photoshop Elements. Now, bringing you back to the frame that we made, let me just double click that and call it Shadow, seeing as I labelled all the others. I said that sometimes if we're going to create a frame and we're using the frame on predominantly darker toned images, then of course the drop shadow and the effect of the 3D matte effect can be lost a little bit. If you want to boost it, a quick and easy way to do that is just to copy your shadow layer. Control J will do that, but you can just drag it over the copy icon at the bottom, which is the same one you would use to create a new layer. Now if I just turn this on and off, you can see how that beefs up the shadow quite considerably. But the good thing about this technique is we can just save another frame and give it the same name but maybe call it darker. But if 1 wasn't enough for your shadow, but 2 was too much, well then you can always temper the second one, so you can have 1.5 times virtually. So there's lots of versatility and creativity in making these frames. Now with the spinning round of the screen, I've speeded up the process of what I want to show you next. I've just opened up that huge image of the bald eagle, because there are times when we'd like to put an image inside the frame with a little bit of the background colour actually displayed. Well, then we need to know roughly what size images we need. Now I've calculated that this needs about 1615 by 787 pixels, which as you can see has allowed me to come and crop quite a nice section of the image. So when I apply that, if I were to drag that into my frame, just to give you an idea of how it's going to look, I'll put that back up there in case I need it. There's my frame, but what I was referring to is this sort of technique. So I could position it somewhere like that, and if we really wanted to, we could do something with that background, because we could use our frame in this manner and the background too, in which case we wouldn't need to save it as a PNG file, we could save it as a normal JPEG. So there's another opportunity for our frame. If we wanted the background to be slightly off-white, let's see if we can pick something. Let's just pick something a little bit mild grey, select the background, Alt backspace. See what I mean? It's a personal choice. Not happy with the grey and you want to try something different, then just select the colour picker, go back a little bit, so a lighter grey, try again, Alt backspace. Not forgetting, of course, to add that little bit of noise, if you want to, of course, or even one of the Photoshop textures. So I do have the opportunity to save all of these as a JPEG image, or the image I cropped originally, I could take that into Pictures-to-Exe, File, Save As. Again, I can call it Bald Eagle Cropped, and save that as a JPEG at quality 6. Now let's go back into Pictures-to-Exe. So in Pictures-to-Exe, and looking at the file list, I've now got 3 pictures of the bald eagle. That's the original. There's the one that I cropped. So this one is exactly the same size as this one, but of course this one is now all one with its matte background and its frame. So all I'd need to do is to drag this down and give it an appropriate slide duration, and that would play no problem at all. And of course we can adjust the thickness of the inner frame, the mild grey I gave it, to make that bigger or smaller. And in fact you could use this method to display more than one image if you wished. You can see there's lots of versatility here. The other option is to build the image in Pictures-to-Exe using the frame and the cropped eagle. I will use a blank for this. Go to the Objects and Animation screen. I think we can make this a little bigger. We need to click into the grey area, go to Add an Image, and we'll pick up the bald eagle cropped. First thing I want to do is to go to my zoom, right click the X and ask to have the image at the size I created it. That's reasonably important here. When I click into the grey area, I can now go and get my frame. Now you can see the one difference here is the fact, of course, we've got the standard black background which we would get in Pictures-to-Exe, but of course that's variable too. We just go to our slide options, we go to the main tab, there's the solid colour, so I could quickly change that to white, grey, or any of the million colours in between. The one thing I've done here with the bald eagle though, because I've cropped it to this size, I haven't left myself any scope to zoom it. I could zoom down, but I wouldn't zoom up. But then again, I didn't intend to.